Chapter 10. "It's not a big deal," Megan said as she handed me 2 more bottles to put on the top shelf of her new kiosk. "I mean, I don't need a silly old stuffed bull." "It's an ox," I said, standing on tiptoe to get the bottles in place. "So what's the point of me putting these bottles way up here where you can't reach them? I mean, really?" "Because those are display bottles," she said as she handed me 2 more. "That's why they're so light. Nothing in them." "Well, I knew that, obviously," I lied as I brushed some dust off the shelf and placed the final 2 bottles into position. "Thanks for helping me get this thing stocked," Megan said as she started to dismantle one of the last of the cardboard boxes. A text from the delivery guy had summoned us from the amusement park to her new kiosk, and an hour later, the boxes he'd delivered were unpacked and the small kiosk was fully stocked. Megan had selected a sampling of favorite products from her brick-and-mortar store, Chi and Things, and within a few minutes, the shelves of the cart looked and smelled like a miniature version of her shop. I sat down on the stool she had brought along, and she handed me another bottle, this one full of water, while she continued to break down the remaining empty boxes. "Hydrate," she said. "I just don't get it," I said, once I'd won my struggle to wrestle the cap off the bottle and swallowed about half its contents. "I see nothing but a sea of plush blue oxen parading the corridors of this mall. There's one, and there's one, and there's one." I pointed quickly from one kid to another and then another, each of them carrying a big, bright, stuffed blue ox in their undoubtedly sticky little hands. "Why are those little monsters winning stuffed animals, and yet I walked away empty-handed?" "Well," Megan said as she leaned on me thoughtfully, "they might have superior hand-to-eye coordination from playing video games 23 hours a day. They might simply have better eyesight and a steadier aim than a 30-something magician who has, as far as I know, never fired a gun in his life. Or, and I recognize this is a bit of a stretch, their parents may be forking out $40 to $60 and buying them a stuffed bull from that store over there." She gestured across the wide corridor to a large storefront. It was partially obscured by several other kiosks which stood between us and the store. From where I sat, I could see flashes of blue in the front window display, so I got up and repositioned myself, which gave me a direct line of sight to the store. The store's front window was, in fact, an explosion of blue oxen with stuffed creatures in a wide variety of size and wardrobe configurations. I took another step to my right and was able to read the sign above the door. "Build a Babe," I said out loud as I stepped forward. I could see parents and kids through the front window, some looking at options and some completing their purchases. The largest crowd was assembled next to a large plexiglass box in the center of the store, which appeared to contain a swirling tornado of white fuzz. "You can build a Babe the Blue Ox," I repeated as the concept began to become clear to me. "That is not a store name I would recommend Googling," Megan said, but I merely nodded in response as I moved to the other side of her kiosk. This new position afforded me a much better angle for watching the proceedings in the large shop. By the looks of things, people were selecting the size and style of the Babe the Blue Ox they desired, and then taking the limp, unfilled carcass over to the center area of the store, where, with the help of a clerk, the child got to participate in the thrill of personally stuffing his or her own babe. "They're not winning them," I said quietly. "They're buying them. They're simply buying the suckers. It's like a taxidermy shop for stuffed toys." "Feeling a little better about yourself?" Megan asked as she made some minor adjustments to the bottles she had just placed. "Infinitely," I said, as I continued to watch the steady stream of people moving in and out of the store. It appears to be quite the popular destination. Suddenly, there was a new voice behind me. Believe it or not, that store has more foot traffic per hour and per square foot than any other location in the mall, with the exception of the restrooms, which, of course, aren't profit centers. At least, not currently. This was followed by a quick laugh. We turned to see we had been joined by a young woman in a bright red tailored blazer. She had short blonde hair and a professional demeanor that seemed well beyond her obviously youthful demeanor. She held a portfolio in one hand and put out the other hand to Megan. "You must be Megan," she said as her smile got even wider. "The proud new lessee of kiosk 100-28, which we affectionately refer to as K28. I'm Jesse Erickson, the manager of merchant relations, here to personally welcome you to the Mall of America." Megan shook her hand and then gestured to me. "Thanks. This is Eli Marks. We all know who he is," she said as she put out her hand to me. "Our new amazingly magical magician." Her handshake was as firm as her hand was soft. She gave my hand a little unnecessary squeeze before releasing me. "We are so looking forward to seeing what you have up your sleeve for us." Before I could disabuse her of the notion I might ever have anything up any sleeve, she had turned back to Megan and put a welcoming hand on her shoulder. "Now, we understand the first few days can be a little overwhelming, so I won't add to the overload you might already be feeling," she said, as she patted Megan's back maternally and then slid her portfolio open. "So, I'll just leave you with these few items and my contact information so you can track me down if you have any questions. And seriously, don't hesitate to call 24/7. "Thanks," Megan said as she glanced at me with a smile. This young lady was all business, and the effect, while charming, also had a certain put-on quality to it, like someone playing grown-up who actually wasn't quite yet. "You can, of course, find all this information online, but some people prefer to have hard copies as well," Jessie said as she handed Megan a small sheaf of papers. "In here you'll find all the contact numbers, security information, merchant discount programs, and a few promotional ideas some other kiosk lessees have found to be beneficial. Because we know the 3 reasons you've chosen to plant your flag here at the Mall of America is to sell, sell, sell. Am I right?" "Yes. Thanks," Megan said as she began to politely page through the documents. "We're so glad you opted for this spot," Jessie said as she looked at the surrounding kiosks. "This is a high-traffic area, and we hated to see this space sit empty." "Has it been empty for long?" I asked while Megan continued to look through the papers. "A couple months, more or less," Jessie said. "Who had it before Megan?" Jessie looked me right in the eye for a long moment, then opened her portfolio. "You know, that's a great question. I don't actually remember who held this spot." She made a cursory look through her documents and then quickly turned her attention back to Megan, clearly wanting to move off this particular topic. "Finally, I've got your temporary employee badge. You'll need to stop by the security office to get your photo. And if you have any overstock," she said as she looked around at all the collapsed boxes, "which you don't appear to currently have by the looks of it." This produced a quick laugh, although I'm not entirely sure why. "No, I did a pretty good job of shipping over just what we'd need to get started." "Well, good on you, girl," Jessie said, holding up her hand for a high five. Took Megan a moment to decode the gesture. She tentatively tapped the young woman's hand with her own, looking to me to check if she'd done it right. I gave her a silent nod of approval. "Well, if you do find yourself in an overstock situation," Jessie continued, "your lease provides you with a storage space downstairs. It's on the mall layout map in those papers. Here's your key. Your locker is B28. "Bingo," Megan said, but the joke went right over the young woman's head. "And remember, If you need anything, Jessie added as she turned to leave. 24/7, Megan said, matching Jessie's smile wattage amp for amp. The young woman gave us one final wave as she disappeared into the steady flow of shoppers. She makes me feel old, Megan said finally, like she's super young with an extra serving of youthful sauce. I didn't respond because I was looking at the key Jessie had placed in Megan's hand. If I was remembering the signs I had seen on the storage rooms, the B-28 storage locker was a stone's throw from where Billy Bloom had been murdered. I guess the only real update I have for you is that apparently the surveillance cameras by the south loading dock don't work. But I'm guessing the police already know that? Indeed we do, Deirdre said. I could tell through the phone that she was walking, probably down one of the marble corridors in the Minneapolis courthouse downtown. The tap-tap-tap of her high heels was so loud I could barely hear her above the racket. I was sitting uncomfortably on one of the hard benches in the small theater, waiting for my second day of rehearsal with Nemisha to begin. I'd made a point of being early, which meant, of course, that she was late. The question we don't have answered is, Deirdre continued, was the person who killed Billy Bloom aware the cameras in that area didn't work? And is that why they picked that area? Or did the choice of location have nothing to do with the non-operational camera? I don't know, I said. Seems awfully convenient for the killer if they stumbled into that blind spot in the security system unaware. Although, if the fella I spoke to knows what he's talking about, there are lots of holes in the security system out here. Who's your source? At that moment, it occurred to me that I hadn't had the presence of mind to ask the guy his name. It was a fella dressed as Babe the Blue Ox, but he had his head off and was taking a smoke break. This was followed by a long silence from Deirdre. However, whatever had got her tongue hadn't slowed the pace of her walking, which was still tap-tap-tapping in my ear. I see, she finally said. Any further instructions? I asked, as I heard the distinctive sound of the stage door opening and closing. I've got to get to rehearsal. Just keep doing the same thing I always told you to do before you went on stage. You mean, don't suck? That's it. It's a wonder we were married as long as we were, I said, repeating a thought I'd heard from more than one of my friends. Yes, it is, she said. Either she hung up at that point or stopped walking because the phone went silent. I waited for a second to see if there was more to come, but the quiet continued. I pocketed my phone as Nemisha walked out on stage. Are we doing the Metamorphosis trunk? She asked, looking around the bare stage. And good morning to you as well, I said, recognizing a tone of reproach in her voice. Yes, that's the final piece we have to work on. She again scanned the empty stage. So, where is it? Let me get it, I said, climbing up on the stage and heading into the left wing to drag out the large trunk. She watched while I situated it on the platform, lining up its four corners with the small pieces of glow tape on the floor to ensure its proper placement. So, if I'm remembering correctly, the routine has you going into the trunk and then switching with me, I began, but she cut me off. I think that's open for debate, she said sharply. I stopped, having not expected an argument so early in the process. I mean, I was expecting a disagreement at some point. Having spent a couple of days rehearsing with Nemisha, I knew it was inevitable. I glanced at my watch, wondering what the over-under had been in Vegas on how quickly this would erupt. I looked helplessly toward the tech booth in the back, but Morgan had disappeared to get coffee and had not yet returned, or possibly had returned and was hiding. I turned back to the issue at hand. Okay, I said slowly. On the DVD Morgan gave me, that's the way the routine was performed. And I'm saying that doesn't mean it's the way we have to do it. I considered the minefield I had suddenly found myself in. Well, in the Pendragon's version, Jonathan went into the crate and Charlotte went on top of the crate, I began. I have studied their routine very closely. That was true. I'd nearly worn out the VHS tape my uncle had given me. Well, I had lunch with Jonathan Pendragon once, and he talked at length about the routine. He said, she continued, putting a hand on her hip and shifting her weight as she settled in for a fight, that the routine is a meritocracy. Whoever was the fastest and the best at each phase was the deciding factor. Okay, I said, as I held up my hands in a defensive posture and then immediately regretted the action. My hands flopped down by my sides again, probably looking as ineffectual as I felt. I saw Siegfried and Roy do their version on more than one occasion, she continued. In addition to studying the tape of the Pendragons, I also studied what Doug Henning did. I worked for a summer with Pop Hayden. I'm sure you're familiar with his version. I understand the value of doing it fast. I understand the value of doing it slowly. For Houdini, it was simply an escape trick, and then he added the element of the transposition. But in the right hands, it can go from escape to penetration to transposition to transformation, if it's done right. She spat out these last 4 words and then stared me down. I took a deep breath. Well then, I said, measuring my words, let's do it right. She gave me a long look, surprised I had acquiesced so quickly. Well, all right then, she said. And with that, we began to work. There were, to be sure, several other contentious moments throughout that morning as we ran through the routine, but nothing as combustible as our initial volley. Nemisha had her point of view, and I had mine. To be honest, she seemed far better versed in the mechanics and history of the illusion, so I conceded on most points. The main question, who would first go into the trunk, became our next stumbling block. I quickly realized Billy Bloom had performed the illusion the opposite way the Pendragons did it. In Bloom's version, the assistant went into the trunk and the magician went on top of the trunk. The large silk, called a foulard, Nemisha informed me on 3 separate occasions, was raised, and when it was lowered, the magician had transformed into the assistant. I argued the Pendragon's version was stronger, but couldn't back it up with any real proof. My only argument was that it looked cool when Charlotte Pendragon tossed the foulard up in the air, and then, in an instant, it was Jonathan behind it, pulling it away dramatically to reveal the transformation. In the end, it was the physics of the trick which dictated our approach. Since Nemisha was far nimbler than I, it was she who would go into the trunk. It was clear she would have preferred to be the one who appears, as if by magic, running down the theater's main aisle at the conclusion of the trick, but for the time being, until I could become faster and build up, or establish, some upper body strength, I got the glory. Although we both understood she was the one really doing the heavy lifting in the trick. My primary function was to not get in her way and not break my neck in the process. So that was where I focused the lion's share of my attention. "You're better at working with Nemisha than Bloom was," Morgan said to me after we'd hit the 120-minute mark and she had promptly called it a day. He was helping me put the trunk back into the wings as I was visibly wobbly from the morning's exertions. "Really? What's the key difference?" "Less screaming," he said matter-of-factly. "Much less high-pitched screaming." I considered this. My late Aunt Alice had an expression she used all the time, I said. Something about catching flies and employing honey. I never really understood it, but I think the gist of it was that less screaming is almost always better. Well, they had a volatile relationship offstage, too, Morgan said, once we had slid the trunk into place. They were dating? This was a surprising thought, particularly considering their complete lack of onstage chemistry, certainly at the one performance I had witnessed. On again, off again, I think, Morgan said. She has a boyfriend or a fiancé or something. A fiancé or something? I repeated, wanting more information but not wanting to sound pushy about it. I think it's an arranged thing, he said. I'm not really hip to the details, except that I don't think she's all that hot on the guy. Relationships are weird. At least mine are. You got someone special? I asked, then immediately regretted the phraseology, which made me sound like Judge Hardy in an old Andy Hardy movie from the 40s. Morgan shook his head. I'm in the epitome of an on-again, off-again relationship. We've had calls from the Guinness Book. Where does it stand right now? Hard to tell. Let me check. He pulled out his phone, hit a couple of buttons, and then listened without expression to what must have been a very long message. He pushed the end button on his phone and returned it to his pocket, glancing up at me as he did. Looks like we're off again, he said flatly, and then jumped off the stage and headed up the aisle to his tech booth. Figuring this was all the information I was likely to get, I turned and headed backstage toward the stairway, which would take me to my dressing room, and one or two more double-stuffed Oreos.